Okay, so welcome to Vibe, everyone. We're in Moi Wo, we're on Lantau Island, and we're in Hong Kong. Today's broadcast is going to go out globally on Facebook. We have cameras here and a camera here, so please don't move around during the presentation. Today's talk is with David Bellis of Grulo fame. David has collected pictures from all sorts of people across Hong Kong and created a database and over the last 30 years. And today he's going to talk about, there's 5 volumes that he has, and today's 5th volume, so he's going to orientate the talk around that book. So without further ado, David Bellis, everyone.
Thanks, Gary. And thanks to everyone for coming along this afternoon. So, as Gary says, the pictures that we're looking at here are a selection from my collection, and they've all got people in them. So as I started work on the 5th book, I knew I wanted it to be about people. And then as I was looking at them all, I also got to wondering about, well, who among them call Hong Kong home, or who was just passing through? We'll be heading back to the UK in the summer after about 30 years here, so it's sort of a question that's been on my own mind. Looking at some of the groups of people that we see in these pictures, we're going to start with tourists. And they're probably the easiest ones to answer the question. They're only here for 2 or 3 days. They were never here to stay or make it home. But they're very important to me because it's where a lot of these pictures come from. Perhaps they were buying postcards, sending them back to friends and family. Maybe they were buying commercial pictures and putting them in an album, or some would bring their own camera and take their own pictures. So tourism gets off to a pretty rocky start in the early years of British Hong Kong. The journey out was long and uncomfortable, and when you got here, it was a pretty rough and ready place. It wasn't very healthy, just wasn't a very attractive place to come. But there were 2 things happened in November 1869, which sort of gave things a bit of a step forward. The first one was the arrival of Prince Alfred. This is Queen Victoria's second son, Duke of Edinburgh. He came to visit. So first of all, it sort of gives Hong Kong the royal seal of approval, and also gets us in the news a lot. It was a big deal for Hong Kong. They built this archway to welcome him. It was down at the end of Pedder Street, so this was the seafront at the time. It would be Devoe Road today. This would be the landmark building in the background here. And one of the tasks that he had while he was here was to open up the new City Hall, a brand new building, very grand building. Today, this half is roughly where the old Bank of China is, and this half is about half of the current HSBC site. It had a large theatre, it had a museum, it had a library, it had meeting rooms. So this was a big step forward in terms of sort of like civic infrastructure for Hong Kong. We can't say it unleashed a wave of tourism. You know, there were still a lot of things to not like about it, but it was a step in the right direction. Over time, things get better. In 1893, local publisher Kelly and Walsh, they put out their handbook to Hong Kong for the use of tourists. So obviously things are moving ahead. Not great timing though. 1893, 1894, we get the plague, and Hong Kong is not on anyone's list of places to come and visit. So it's been pretty much a roller coaster through the early years. The 1900s are better. 1910s, World War I. 1920s, that's when things get going, the roaring 20s. So we start the year with a brand new hotel, the Repulse Bay Hotel. This is one of their luggage labels. And they market themselves as being on the Riviera of the East. So they're going definitely after that sort of the wealthy tourist, come and spend some money there. The hotel company had a whole series of these done. You can just see a little name down here, Dan Sweeney. They're all very attractive. And it seems to be a bit of a theme at the time. This is a postcard from a French shipping line, Messagerie Maritime. So they had a line which went from France out to Yokohama with a stop in Hong Kong. So this was one of the regular ships that would be seen in the harbour. And they commissioned a different artist to do a series of humorous sketches along the ports along the route. So this is their Hong Kong picture. the descent from the peak. This is what they imagined. These are the sort of liners you might see. This is a ship berthed at the Kowloon Wharves. This would be Ocean Terminal today. If you look at the name, it's the Empress of France. Just coincidence. It's nothing to do with the French shipping line. This was Canadian Pacific. So this was on the route back and forth to the west coast of Canada. Ships then at that time were very much point to point. A lot of them would be going back and forth across the Atlantic, for example. And the general setup was a smallish first class, a sort of a middle-sized second class, a large third class, and then quite a lot of room for cargo as well here. But in 1922-23, there's something which to me is the sort of the start of modern tourism, something that we'd recognise today. It's the first time that they had round-the-world cruises, and it was definitely a thing. That year there were 4 different ships made these cruises. Empress of France was one of them. It wasn't the first one. The first one was the Laconia, I think is the name, so if I don't get it wrong. And the first thing that's obviously very different about it is that where that ship would normally carry 2,200 passengers, in this case the whole ship was hired by American Express. They shut down third class, closed down most of second class, and there's just about 430 wealthy Americans. And they go on a 130-day cruise right around the world, and it's all about shopping and eating and sightseeing. And it's tourism as we know it. Now, luckily for us, a young lady on the ship was a 26-year-old Eleanor Phelps, and she kept a diary, and you can read that online at one of the university archives. So they arrived 17th of January, and first thing is to go shopping. That's their first activity. Doesn't write whether she buys any porcelain, but I'm sure she would have visited something a bit like this. So all sorts of different things for sale. I always hope when I show this picture that someone's going to jump up and say, you know, we've got that on our mantelpiece back home. Great-grandfather must have bought it on a visit to Hong Kong. Hasn't happened yet, but I mean, seriously, I imagine a lot of this was taken away with either tourists or families who'd lived here for a while and then heading back home. After the shopping, they needed a rest, so it was over to the Hong Kong Hotel. And we're back to that same junction again, so Pedder Street, Devoe Road. Again, it's the site of the landmark today, but here it was the Hong Kong Hotel at its prime, its largest extent. A short rest, hop in a sedan chair, they headed over to the Peak tram station, and they went up the Peak. And after that exertion, it was another visit to a hotel and another sit down, this time to the Peak Hotel. So this is where the Peak Galleria is today, the big grand hotel here. Here's the terminus and boiler house. You can see the smoke blowing here at the top of the Peak tram. And just one building that you can still see today, it's this one here. We'd know it as the Peak Cafe or the Peak Lookout. Originally, it was built as a simple stone shelter. So lots of men would be stood here waiting for their employers to come up on the tram, and then they would carry them home on a sedan chair or later pull them on a rickshaw. And so the shelter was built for those people, and you can see some of them lined up here. So that was Eleanor's next journey. She hops in a sedan chair and went up to the very top of the Peak to admire the sunset. And in her diary, that seems to have been the highlight of the visit. She said watching the sun go down and the little lights twinkling on, and you've got all the little junks have got their lanterns and things. It was a sight to remember. So here's where she'd have started. This is where the Peak Hotel was. These are the lights of Lugard Road, and she'd have gone up, right up to the top. Some of you may sort of know the signal station. I think that's the mast we can see there, and she would have carried on probably up to one of the pavilions right up the top here. After that, next few days, yeah, not unlike a visitor's itinerary today. There was more shopping, went on a launch trip, went on a drive around the island, drive around the new territories, and had a Chinese meal, which she described as edible. So not high praise. She did like the chicken and walnuts, but she wasn't impressed with the mushrooms. Didn't like those at all. The decade then, as we get towards the end, another step forward, a big new hotel opens. It's the Peninsula across the harbour, and it's perfectly located. We've got the hotel here, we've got the terminus of the railway, obviously the clock tower still surviving today, and then just around the corner we've got the wharves where the liners would be berthing. Again, not great timing. So it opens to paying guests in 1928, and of course 1929 is the Wall Street crash, the Great Depression, and the end of wealthy Americans sailing to Hong Kong for a while. Then we've got the war years, and then is the 50s when we'll get the next big burst of enthusiasm for that. So as we say, tourists just passing through. Let's look at some people who were here for a longer stay. These are figures taken from the 1931 census. We're just looking at foreigners here. And you can see pretty much exactly half were British, and almost half of those were military, so soldiers and sailors at that time. Here are some of those soldiers sitting for a group photo. Not a formal one. I guess the photographer just went up and said, you know, would you like a picture taken? And then they'll come back and sell some copies. Cap badge here we can see is a Middlesex cap badge. So these are the Middlesex Regiment. Another picture. I might have seen this. This is in book one. This is no need to go guessing here. They don't have cap badges. They've all got 9s. You can see they're taking 9 very seriously. They've got 9s on their lapels as well. They are the famous number 9s. And they are from the 25th Middlesex Regiment. So this was a fundraising performance that was put on. So around this time, start of the 20th century, the Middlesex are here twice. They're here from 1906, 1908, and then they come back again 1917, 1918. This one is easy to date just by the number here. In the first visit, there were only 4 battalions in the Middlesex. But this one is in the middle of World War I, where the whole British military system has exploded, and that's why we're looking at the 25th Battalion here. That was their formal name, their less glamorous name perhaps. They were known as the Hernia Brigade. So these were men who were considered unfit for the trenches in France, and they'd be sent out around the garrisons to release the stronger, fitter men to come back to Europe and fight. So that's the date for those guys. How about our other group here? There is another picture in the set, same studio. It shows where they were staying. So we're back up at the peak. These are the Mount Austin barracks, Mount Kellett in the background here. And in the centre, these are probably the stairs, I think, where they were sitting for their picture. Doesn't help because both times the Middlesex were here, they were stationed at the Mount Austin barracks, so that doesn't work. What else can we find out? Well, there's 2 clues. The first clue is the silky smooth upper lips of these gentlemen. And the second clue is the format of the picture. So if we flip it over and look at the back, it was, again, taken by a commercial photographer who would have come up or gone to the show, taken a picture, gone back and developed it on this special postcard-shaped, pre-printed paper. It was a thing of the time. It was manufactured, this one by Bellis, but there were lots of companies making it. And then he'd have gone back and sold copies to the people in the picture. So this is popular from the 1910s on, which fits our wartime years. The other picture, though, is what's called a cabinet card. So the picture is stuck onto a thick piece of card, and this was a worldwide standard, very popular in the 19th century. I'm a bit surprised that this is so late. Most of the world, they'd gone out of fashion. This is probably one of the last ones to be made here in Hong Kong. So that suggests the earlier date. And then back to those upper lips, where everyone who can has got a moustache. So it being the army, it wasn't by choice. From about the 1850s on in the British Army, if you could grow a moustache, you had to grow a moustache. We've got a couple of here who get away with it. Probably boy soldiers. You could sign up at 14. Couple, he's certainly not a boy soldier. I'm not sure what his story is. There's one here and one here who don't, so not quite sure. But in general, if you could, you had to. And the reason it changed was in World War I, they were worried that the gas mask wouldn't make an airtight seal on the moustache. And so overnight, all soldiers had to shave off the moustache. So this is definitely the first time. Did they ever call it home? Well, no, they were here because they were told to be. You know, you went where you were ordered, and when the orders came to move, you moved on. So typically the soldiers have quite a distant relationship with the places that they stayed. There would be a trickle of people staying. Some people would end their service while they were in Hong Kong and they'd stay on. They'd perhaps move into one of the uniformed service, maybe like become a prison officer, police, dockyard police, something like that. But for the most part, they were moving on. So let's switch to the civilians and see if we get any different answers there. Here's a picture from book 2. One of my favourites, it's a cable car, which is a bit unusual. So what's the story there? Well, these two men are miners, and they were working on the Beacon Hill Tunnel construction project. And there's two parts to the story. The first one is, these are probably Italian men that we're looking at here. It starts off with British miners, but they worked out it was so expensive to get them out here, they could pretty much do whatever they wanted and they weren't going to be fired. And so they would, turn up late, turn up drunk, not turn up at all. They just thought, what are you going to do about it? But the government called their bluff and went looking for a solution. And they found a team of Italian miners had just finished a project in southern China, and they brought them to Hong Kong, and it worked out very, very well. But the problem with the project was initially all the men were camped near the tunnel entrance, which is surrounded by paddy fields with lots of mosquitoes. And they were all getting malaria and getting sick, and they couldn't go to work. So the solution was move the camp up to the top of a nearby hill and build a cable car. So this was their daily commute to and from work by cable car. These, a bit like the soldiers though, just here for the project and on they move. Next picture comes from an album which starts off with lots and lots of pictures of the big typhoon in 1906, so we know when they were here. And this is not your typical tourist picture, so I'm assuming that the family were here on this project. And this is the big expansion of the naval dockyard. So all the land that we're looking at in front of us is recently reclaimed, and this chimney is going to be the chimney for the big new power station that will be built in front of it. This is all the Admiralty area that we call it today. Several pictures in the album show this lady. Here they're taking a break from tennis. This is Edwardian outfit for running around the tennis court. If you can imagine with all this, your hat would have veils that you should drop down as well. Quite hard to imagine. Anyway, this is the lady who pops up several times. The frustrating thing is not once does she ever write a name on any photo, which is quite common. You look at the photos, they're your photos, you know who they are, so why would you bother? But I've got no idea exactly who we're looking at here, unfortunately. So probably, again, here for the project, move on. Different album or different set of photos. First thing that catches the eye, or catched my eye, is the building here. First time I've ever had a good view of this. This is the golf club's house at Deepwater Bay, the original clubhouse. Quite ornate, as you can see here. And these are the people who were there, and happy days. When we flip it over, we've got Annie, Mrs. Duncan, Mr. Hosey, Lewis, Father, Maud, and Cedric. So those are all the people at the golf house, Deepwater Bay, New Year's Day, 1916. Now, we found Mr. Hosey and a Mr. Duncan in the jurors lists, and they're working at the dockyard. So we're thinking, okay, that's probably where they're from. And then other pictures confirm it. This is Annie and the two boys again. And this is one of those big powered winches that'll pull a ship into dock. And in this picture of Cedric, the interesting stuff is in the background where we can see a ship, but very, very low down. Normally, the ship should be towering over us. So we're actually looking at a ship in dry dock. And this is the dry dock in Hung Hom. So it's all kind of coming together. still didn't get any further with these people. They give first names, but never a surname. And just father for father, we don't ever know more than that. But we went to the jurors lists and we could cross off all of the junior positions like clerks, and we ended up with about 15 people. And one of our readers, who's a whiz at tracing family histories, went through the shipping records and found a match for this exact list of names of all the children. And so it's the Graham children we're looking at, a Graham family. The families at the dockyards, they had a very different experience of Hong Kong. So Mr. Graham, he arrives about 1898, somewhere around there, and leaves just after about 1920, so a good 2 decades here. Mr. Hosey, he's a new arrival when this picture was taken. He just turned up in 1915, but he's still here when war breaks out and he goes into Stanley Camp. So he spends the whole war years here in Hong Kong, survives the internment, and then retires back to Scotland in his case. So he's here about 30 years. A different photo. This is the original is a big photo, so lots and lots of detail here. See, a man's got an X marked on him here. So there's some notes on the back. It's Mr. Cooper. The notes are written by his wife, and she says this was his 3rd project in a row of dockyards. So these are all men working on the Great Tai Koo dockyard, the biggest project in Hong Kong at the time. 3 was obviously enough. After this project, he goes to South America, and the rest of his working life is spent running railways. So quite a change of career. This is part of the project, and it was a huge project. So initially, there was a huge hill here. So before they've even got to ground level, they've excavated a big hill, and they've kept on going. So this is excavating the dry dock. This will be Hong Kong's biggest dry dock out at Tai Koo. A technical term for you, which I was surprised to learn. After you dig down here and you've got this rocky core left in the middle, the technical term for that is a dumpling. That's the quarrymen's term, which I'd never heard before. Off in the distance, at the pointy end, we've got a railway line coming in. This is where the carts come and take the rock away. And when the excavation's finished, this will be completed, the wall will be finished here, and they will put a foundation stone to commemorate it just on the end of the dock there. And if you go to Tai Koo today, you'll still see it in just about the position where it used to stand. And the fun thing for me is, or the interesting thing, is that it gives us the names of the 3 senior engineers, MacDonald, Griffin and Clark. And I'm guessing that as the senior guys, they're probably in this group sitting here in the middle. And presumably this is Donald MacDonald, the chief engineer. Now the 3 men had very different experiences of Hong Kong. Mr. William Gay Clark comes to Hong Kong, finishes the project, he's out of here. Albert Edwin Griffin arrives at the same time, but something about Hong Kong must have caught his fancy. He stays on and joins Lee and Orange, the local architects, and ends up being a director there. But Donald MacDonald is the real old China hand. He's so embedded into Hong Kong life. When the other guys first arrive, he's already been here 25 years. He's worked for Jardines, he's worked at the dock company, he was the engineer of Hong Kong's fire brigade for a while, he was the acting commandant of the volunteers, and if you know Lane Crawford, well, he married the daughter of Mr. Crawford, so he's really a local man. And after this project, he opens his own company and stays on even longer. So we are seeing people who are making Hong Kong their home. Perhaps the more obvious place to look for people who are making Hong Kong is the local population. These are some of the 2,500 to 3,000 local workers on the Tai Koo project. These were quarrymen, according to the note on the back, and quite shocking the foot equipment or lack of at this time. It's mostly bare feet, a few little sort of leather slippers, perhaps wooden clogs, but quite incredible given the heavy loads that they were working with. So, not surprisingly, looking at the census through the years, the bulk of Hong Kong's population obviously is Chinese. The foreign population peaks here, 1881, at about 6%. That's the most it gets to. Although, oddly, if you look at today's census, the last one was 2021, the foreign population is up to about 8%. The reason is the foreign domestic helpers, so about half, about 4% are domestic helpers now. Were they calling Hong Kong home? Well, on day one, yes. About 5,000 or 6,000 people lived in Hong Kong. Obviously, it was their home. But almost immediately, they're the minority. If you look at this, so we've gone 5,000, 6,000, 20 years later, we're over 100,000. So all the people around you on the street, 90% are recent arrivals. And that just carries on. Right up to 1941, the population is just an exponential curve. If you pick any point on the line, half of the population has arrived in the last about 15 years. So you're always surrounded by new arrivals and people coming into Hong Kong. Many of those men are coming from southern China. Many of them are not very skilled. So a lot of them end up in physical labor. And that's something that really strikes visitors to Hong Kong, especially from Europe or America. It's just the amount of physical labor that's done by people here. So when we look at the engraving here, this is from the London newspaper, 1882, sketches at Hong Kong. Obviously, this is not a historically accurate, cross-section of society, but just as a quick glimpse, mostly men and mostly working, carrying things, carrying people, pulling people. So the shoulder pole, I've had a section on this in book 4, pops up lots of times. This is early 1930s, based on the cinema picture here. We're on Queen's Road, just the start of Queen's Road West. And this would be the equivalent of a La-La Move or a Go-Go van today when you want to hire someone to take something. These men would stand around, they'd have their little pitch, they'd be there with the shoulder pole. You need something moved, you hire them to carry something away. I've looked at this picture many times over the years and I still can't work out what he's carrying. Ribs is my best get, but I'm not quite sure. Mystery. So this is like one of the bottom rungs of the very hand-to-mouth sort of existence. If you are lucky, perhaps you get employed in a company, and I guess that's what we're seeing here. We're back on Pedder Street again. This is the Hong Kong Hotel, this is that junction, but we're looking in the opposite direction this time. And if you look at the man's load, he's carrying a wicker basket and a canvas bag, so I think he's probably perhaps delivering laundry or something like that. The greatest concentration of men who are carrying heavy loads would be down on the seafront. So Connaught Road at that time was a busy working port. It's the equivalent of our container ports today. It's where all the goods are coming in and out of Hong Kong. You can see the line of masts along the line here. I'm sorry, this is not Connaught Road, this is still Devoe Road, I believe. This is the Central Market on the left here, so a little bit earlier. And the load in this case, bricks by the look of it, but at different times of day, all sorts of things would be being carried back and forth across from sort of warehouses and stores out to the junks and then out to the bigger ships in the harbour. And some of the loads they carried are quite astounding. This is a coal yard from the 1930s. At this time in Britain, you'd probably already be on to maybe a petrol-driven, or I don't know if it's petrol or diesel, whatever, but some sort of motor vehicle, or failing that, a horse and cart. But here in Hong Kong, it's all done by people with baskets. And the way they worked was quite interesting. You see he's got a set of baskets here. So you'd have perhaps a set of 6. You'd fill them all up. You'd walk 100 paces, you'd put them down, you'd go back and get the next 2. 100 paces, put them down, go back, get the next 2. And you just repeat that, and you'd move your 6 baskets 100 paces at a time to wherever it was you're going. And your whole day would be spent carrying things like that. If you had a bit more of an entrepreneurial flair, you might become a hawker. That was another sort of starting point for many people to earn some money. This is Connaught Road, where roughly where the Mandarin is. Mandarin would be off to the left. And you can see on the picture here, this is about 1902, I think, 1901. We've got somebody selling snacks. So this is his little portable setup. Similar scene, different seafront. This is Causeway Road. That's the name that gives Causeway Bay its name. So Central Library just off to the right, Victoria Park to the left. But at this point, it's the big typhoon shelter. You can see the sampans are beached here, the tide's out. And the man has interesting working style. He doesn't use one of the shoulder poles. He's got this sort of padded donut on his head. So when his work is done, he folds everything up and just carries it away on top of his head. Can't see what he's selling, unfortunately. The lady's in the way here, but some sort of food, I guess. Drinks were another common thing to be sold. Some sort of insulated pot here, maybe a vacuum pot, hot or cold, depending on the season. And in the background, we've got the Leighton Hill government quarters and St Margaret's. I think this is over on the right. So we're in Happy Valley. This is a day at the races, which would be good business for the hawkers. Maybe you've got a skill. So here, barbers were in demand. Before the Chinese Revolution, the men had to keep their foreheads shaved, so regular trip to the barber. And you could find a barber along the street. So you can see he's completely self-contained. At the end of the day, he'll pop a shoulder pole on. On one end will be this little rack. This is his stove and where he heats up the water for shaving, washing hair. On the other end, he's got a little cabinet with his equipment in, and also doubles as a seat for his customer, who looks very happy with the service he's receiving. Shoes too. And here we've got someone who's making a step from being a hawker, perhaps towards having a fixed pitch. We've had an old hawker's license uploaded on the website, and it just shows something like, under a stairway. So they had a very small space, but at least it was a bit more permanent. In this case, it's a cobbler. So he's mending or making a shoe for the man here. And this name on the wall, I think, is probably his, it's sort of, this is my pitch. And he's got as far as having a bit of wood to hang some of his shoes on for sale. So how about these men? Are they making Hong Kong home? Well, this is a breakdown of the split between men and women in Hong Kong. And you can see throughout the 19th century, women not even making up a fifth. And what that means is the men are coming here in search of work, but when it's time to marry and start a family, you'd head back to your village. So really just Hong Kong's all about come here, make the dollars, and go back to your village in southern China. Big changes from 1901 to 1921. I haven't seen a sort of an exact explanation, but this was a very unsettled time in China across the border, and Hong Kong was really growing. We'd become a well-established city. Health was much better here, and so I think it was seen as a safe place, somewhere where you'd either move your family to safety, or perhaps if you were working here, you'd say, okay, well, rather than leave them in the village, I'm going to bring them down to live with me here in Hong Kong. The women who come to Hong Kong, they do just all the work that the men are doing. This is that same coal yard. And of all of the manual labour that we see, the one that amazes me every time is that until about 1928-9, when Stubbs Road is built, everything that's consumed at the peak gets carried up Old Peak Road. So all the coal for the fires, all the food that goes on the table, all the sand that goes into building, it's all carried up by, in this case, a woman doing that same set of 6, 100 paces, put them down. So that was their job all day long. The women very active in the hawker businesses as well. So it's common to see them selling vegetables. This would be a 1950s picture. It says Western Market. It's probably Centre Street, Sayingpoon. That's the big market of the area. And they had lots of hawkers you'd see out on the streets here. You see different vegetables for sale in the background. Selling drinks. This is down on Connaught Road again. Market just off to the right, same sort of area. And here's a case of mistaken identity. The picture's sold with the tag a Chinese beggar in Hong Kong, and you couldn't be sort of further from the truth. If you look at the lady, hair's very neat. It's tied up in a net at the back here. She's wearing bangles, and all the hems are very clean and very, very tidy, and so is her daughter as well. So this was a lady known as a so-so woman. I think from the hawker's cry, probably so-so, so-so. And if you needed maybe a patch, or you had a tear that needed sewing up, or a hem adjusting, then these women would be dotted around the city and would do that work for you. You can see she's got her basket here, all the scraps of materials, and she's got her needles and threads with her. So the last two pictures we see children. And if we can't, unfortunately, we don't get the individual stories with the local pictures. I don't have the names, so we've got to kind of look at some of the broad patterns. And one of them, in 1931, for the first time, the census collector asks, where were you born? Which is a good thing to know. So some of the answers are, I guess, obvious, and some are surprises. Obvious first, the two largest numbers are what the census calls local Portuguese. We probably call Macanese today, so people whose family roots go back to Macau. And the other one is Chinese in the New Territories. So these two groups, I mean, they'd been here for centuries before the British arrived, so they were well established. Lots of them were born here. The two surprises, well, first one is that the Eurasian number is so small. I guessed that the Eurasian population would be similar to this, about 90%, but no, it's only about 3/4. We do have several family histories on Gulo which are of Eurasian families moving up from Australia. So that's, I guess, one example of some of these people in this section here. And the other one is Chinese afloat. People who live on the boats. If you went looking for a mobile population, surely you'd think ships. If you live on a sampan or you live on a junk, you can up and go anywhere you want. But no, although they are mobile within Hong Kong waters, they're not actually going very far, and 3/4 of them are born locally here. Overall at that time, about a third. And so the last surprise, I don't know, any guesses what the number would be today, 2021? Where we're up to? I was thinking it would be up here. It's actually just over 60. So still more than a third of people in Hong Kong were born outside of Hong Kong. A last little section of pictures, some of those children. So this is what's called a stereo view card. It's a good source of pictures. I've actually brought it along. So this is the original one. And this is a modern viewer, but you pop your thumbs in here, you can slide it back and forth to focus, and then you get it right, it pops into 3D. So I'll leave that here. You're welcome to have a look if you'd like. This picture taken over in Kowloon. It's Yaumate. This is Lion Rock back in the distance here, and below it in the distance is the old police station. Another shallow bay, lots and lots of sampans, and lots of children. So here are some of those 75% of the boat people who are born here in Hong Kong. A New Territories picture, or at least we think it's a New Territories picture. The connection is it was found in a bin in the New Territories. It was found in a village, someone had thrown it out, and the finder kindly said, "David, I think you might like this." And I said, "Yes, please." So it's possibly a New Territories family. The date, looking at the stamp of the studio, late 19th century, and they've gone to the photographer's studio. You can see the painted backdrop behind them here. And it's an early example of Photoshop as well. The photographers kindly just touched up the hair, made it a bit darker. You want your eyebrows looking a bit sharper? We can sort that out for you. Our last photo, at first glance, a rural scene, 3 little kids tending chickens, but something's not quite right. We've got a curb here and nice leather shoes and very clean clothes. So if we zoom back out, it's actually a scene in the city. And live chickens, I guess most of us have been here long enough that live chickens were a common thing, and with all the bird flus, they have become less common. My wife grew up in one of the 7-story blocks, and she says that Chinese New Year, you had to have live chicken on the table, and you didn't have refrigeration, so the chicken came to live in the flat for a few days until it was time to go in the pot, with a bit of string round its leg and a bit of string round round the bedpost, and that was the solution. So at a tender age, she was on sweeping duty, sweeping the floor, and noticed that the string had come undone, and it was heading for the door. She thought, no problem, I'll give a swoosh of the brush and problem solved. Anyway, the swoosh goes wrong, and the next thing is the chicken is now sitting on top of the wall outside, not deterred, one more swoosh, which, as you can probably guess, sends chicken off into the distance and somebody else's wok, and she's never been allowed to forget the story by her children. So of all the people in Hong Kong, we've got the tourists at one extreme, who definitely never called it home. We've got the children who've born, lived, died here, 100% call it home. And then for many of us in the middle, perhaps we were born elsewhere and we've moved here, or we were born here and have moved elsewhere. So I can't give you a technical way to measure that, but I think if you added a census question which says, if you leave Hong Kong, will you miss it? I think that would probably cover, and I'll certainly be missing it when we're off. So here we are, coming to the end. So this is today's talk. A couple more talks coming up. We've got a talk about military history in old photos, about 10 days' time. And we're running our own couple of talks in May, which is going to be a sort of a Gulo's greatest hits. We're going to look back at some favourite stories and some of the touching stories we've had with people as well. We've had some quite moving, I find, places where we've perhaps helped people fill in some gaps in their family stories. So that'll be in May. And if you'd like more stories and pictures before that, I have got a series of 5 books. The latest one is what today's talk is sort of linked to. So that's all about the people of Hong Kong, and lots more pictures and stories in the early ones. And Gary's got a special offer arranged on those.
Indeed.
Over there. And there we are, that's the end. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thanks very much, David. I could personally listen to another hour of that. That was just brilliant, wasn't it? So what we're going to do now, we're going to have about sort of 10-15 minutes of questions. Raise your hand if you've got a question. I'll come to you, I'll hold the mic, you ask the question, and we'll go from there. Okay, so first question.
Hi, I've been appreciating your website and your output for many years, but my question is, what are you going to do with the resources, the physical resources? Will they go to an archive, or will they go with you back to the UK?
Okay, so good question. I think if I say I'm moving overseas, the next question is you going to keep running Gulo? Or yes, so the website actually runs on a server in America, so it doesn't matter where you are around the world. So the website will continue running. My books and boxes of pictures will be packed up and will be coming with me. So there'll be a few months break, and I guess while we're settling into the UK, perhaps you won't get as many newsletters, but the site will continue running and we'll keep keep business as usual there.
Do you have a digital archive?
I mean, the website is
Is the
digital.
I mean, can you
okay. Well,
go back to the beginning of your collection? That is
right. Perhaps answer the question, the kind of what happens if you're knocked down by a tram tomorrow answer is we have the Hong Kong U and also the British Library about, I think, every 6 to 12 months come and do a dump of the website and keep a copy of it.
okay.
So one of the questions to think about, I get my $2 card this summer, so you're getting to that time when you think about things. So one of the questions is, well, what happens in the long run? And I'm sure there'll be a time when it'll be time to hand it on to some other organisation, hopefully. But if that doesn't happen, then I want to make sure that there's a good archive copy available that people can still access all the data, all the information.
Okay, we can take another question. Raise your hand if you've got a question. Didn't you have a question?
Well, I had a
Sorry, it's just one moment.
I had a specific question because a while ago there was this photo of the house, a lady sitting on near a swimming pool up in the Pakanhang, our village where I used to live in. I helped to actually identify. There was a big discussion going, is it Sai Kung, is it this?
Yes.
Actually, that was that house. And I'm just wondering, do you have anything else, any more info on the family or any other photos? Or
Okay, so that would be in here. She asked Thomas, do you remember what it was called? What was the name of the
Y-I-C-K
YUEN?
garden or village or sorry? Check.
Whoops.
In Cantonese.
Yik-Yuen.
I believe it had been boarded up
Here's.
There it is.
Yes.
for
Yes.
yeah.
Yik-Yuen. Yes, that's right. That's exactly it. Yes, and that's the lady. And the first photo on the left is that of the lady sitting on. Yeah.
Last time I walked by, the pool was still there, but
Yes.
the building seemed to be gone.
Yeah.
Where
So-
is this?
Within walking distance.
Near Paknam Pong
near,
in Moi Wo.
Oh.
It's a village. Up towards the waterfall.
Yeah.
Near
So-
the
My wife.
waterfall. Near the
A
waterfall.
couple of extra photos have been added, not many,
Oh,
but
right.
there have been a few more.
The whole site's being redeveloped.
And
Yeah, so basically now it's all boarded up, it's being redeveloped. So any archival info would be great.
okay,
I'm
this
not
is all we have
picking
so
your
far.
Conversation
Yeah.
up, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Okay, so any further questions from anyone? Okay, so Louise,
How did you start collecting the photographs? Did you come across a collection? I know a lot of people send you ones from personal archives, but I never see old photos in junk shops in Hong Kong the way I used to in England, and I'm fascinated what got you going.
Yeah, that's a good question. Started off, the history on the website started off with things that I was seeing around town. It was the old air raid shelters. There's some under Kowloon Park. That's what got me going. And then I'd have to look back what it was, but there was something we wrote about, and some readers sent in pictures, and it was great because it suddenly went from just hearing about it to seeing it. And then I did some work on the website to let people upload their own pictures, and from that it just sort of took off. But many of the pictures that we're getting have been copied from somewhere on the internet, say. So the resolution on the screen is sort of like that maximum, and the ones that I've shown today, you'll see I often zooming in to show little details here and there and cat badges and things like that you can't see on a typical internet picture. So that was one reason to get interested in getting copies of the originals. And then where did they come from? 3 main groups. You can get them in auctions. Both in Hong Kong, there are maybe 2 or 3 times a year there are auctions. Often it's the people selling stamps, but there's usually a little section with maybe like 10 or so lots which are photos. eBay, lots of them come from eBay. The bad news about eBay is that everyone knows about eBay, and there's a very lively collectors group within Hong Kong, and apparently with bottomless pockets for money, so I don't tend to get many things on there. And the other one is when you're in the UK, they have still postcard collectors fairs. They're on a bit of a downward curve. In the 10 years or so I've been collecting, some of them have closed and some of them have shrunk, but there are still there are some that are still worth going to, and because you can pick them up and you can take your magnifying glass and check, and you can see, okay, this one's got the detail I'm looking for. They're a nice way to pick up photos.
Okay, great. So, one more question. One last question, Max.
Do you have any film in your archive?
No, which is a conscious decision. I think I was offered film at one point, but the process of digitizing and cleaning of that, I think it's just more work than I can either do that or run the website kind of thing. So I think send them off to the film archive and see if they were interested in having it. Okay,
that remains for me to say, David Bellis of Gulo, thank you very much for coming to Vibe today.
Thank you.
Thank you.